It has been widely assumed that computer games cause violence, but how do we know this? What is this belief based on? Today I will be arguing that there is no evidence to support this claim, and furthermore, that the claim is an example of a new media moral panic. First, to contextualise the argument, an overview of the size and scope of the video games industry will be provided. Secondly, the research to date will be discussed. Finally, the statement or myth will be analysed in relation to moral panics. According to the Interactive Games and Entertainment Association's submission to the Australian Government regarding the possible introduction of an R18+ classification for games, the video games industry has grown steadily for more than 2 decades, becoming a $10 billion industry that competes with the motion picture industry as the most profitable international entertainment industry. To illustrate this, according to Stephen Harrington's Week 4 lecture, the game Modern Warfare 3 earns $1 billion faster than the highest grossing movie of all time. Furthermore, he stated that in Australia, over 90% of households have at least one gaming device. Therefore, the video game industry is huge, meaning it is more likely to rouse the, sometimes unwanted, attention of society. The social myth that computer games cause violence was around before any research had been done. As indicated by the Interactive Games and Entertainment Association submission, the myth was already around back in May 1993, when the Senate Select Committee on Community Standards relevant to the supply of services utilising electronic technologies decided to refuse classification for R18+ games in Australia. This decision was based purely on an assumption, specifically that due to the extra sensory intensity involved in playing interactive games, there would be negative long-term effects. Subsequently, it was proven that there was no basis for this assumption. The Interactive Games and Entertainment Association noted in the same submission that after the decision to restrict games, the Office of Film and Literature Classification commissioned extensive research into the individual and community level effects of computer games. The research showed that this committee's concerns regarding the classification of games were groundless. In the US, the occurrence of several school shootings helped to spark and add fire to the debate about the effects of violent video games. The Australian Government's 2010 Literature Review of Research into the link between violent video games and violent behaviour noted that the 1999 shootings at Columbine High School instigated a lot of public debate on the impact of violent video games, as the 2 shooters regularly played the computer game Doom. The report observed that as a result of this debate, 9 jurisdictions in the US banned the sale of certain violent video games to minors. The report noted that all of these bans have now been overturned as unconstitutional, and that all judicial reviews of violent video games literature to date have found that causal links between violent games and aggressive behaviour are inconclusive. Christopher Ferguson, in his 2011 article, Video Games Are Not the Enemy, wrote that the best studies now coming out provide no support for the notion that violent video games contribute to youth violence, and that there is only little evidence that violent games cause a reduction in empathy or civic behaviour. Interestingly, he also stated that in a recent study he conducted, he found that youth exposed to violent games actually engaged in more pro-social behaviours. Thus, a summary of the research to date concludes that video games do not cause violence, and expose this notion as a myth. Perhaps the fear and demonisation of video games is an example of yet another moral panic. Eric Good and Nachman Ben Yehuda, in their book Moral Panics, The Social Construction of Deviance, wrote that a moral panic occurs when a group or category engages, or is merely said to engage, in immoral behaviour, which is seen as a threat to the basic values of society. In fact, the social temperature surrounding video games fulfills 3 of Good and Ben Yehuda's criteria for the characteristics of a moral panic. Firstly, there is a high level of concern over the actions of a particular group. The second being that there is hostility towards this group. And the third, that there is a consensus that the threat posed by the group is real and serious. The Australian Government's Literature Review points to critics who note that such panics can be started by a dramatic and newsworthy event that aggravates dormant social fears and concerns, such as, for instance, a school shooting, as previously discussed. Furthermore, the current debate is reminiscent of several moral panics of the past, which have always been directed at new media. Stephen Harrington stated in the Week 4 lecture that the likelihood of believing the myths of video games increases substantially if you don't play them, a fact that is also indicative of a moral panic, in that people are more likely to target what they don't know or understand, as they perceive it as a threat to current social norms. Past targets have ranged from dime novels to comic books to rock and roll and rap music. So it seems that even though many people believe that computer games cause violence, research exposes this to be a myth. Not only this, but the parallels between the circumstances surrounding this myth and the characteristics of a new media moral panic suggests that the industry has merely become an unfair target for the production of society's fears.